Good afternoon, everyone. We are here for another budget presentation. This is, I don't know how many, did anybody count how many budget presentations have we done, Hayda? 3 a year or something for 10 years, something like that. Is that probably fair? 30-ish? You've been at every one of them. Steele is not. Well, good afternoon. We wanted to present our executive budget for the fiscal year 2013, which begins, let me remind you, this July 1st. As we have in the past, we will work out a final budget in a collaborative way between Speaker Chris Quinn and the City Council between now and then. And I am confident the result will be an on-time, balanced budget that reflects our values and our priorities. The budget we're submitting won't impose any new taxes on New Yorkers, I'm sure you'll be happy to know. It maintains the strength of the NYPD and also increases support for our public schools. The crime rate today is at an all-time low, and hopefully it will continue to even go down further. And our teachers are doing amazing things with our kids. We obviously always are going to have a long ways to go in education. But I think if you talk to the Secretary of Education, he will tell you we're a model for what a big city can do with a school system. It continues to get better and better, and we'll always have challenges. But the good news is the number of teachers in our schools will rise in the next school year. We're able to make these commitments because of years of fiscal care, foresight, and constructive partnerships with the City Council. And they're also the result of our efforts to diversify the city's economy. If you remember, well before the worst national recession in decades struck, and also well before most other cities and state governments heeded the economic storm warnings, we began setting aside savings and reducing spending. And since 2008, we've undertaken 11 separate rounds of belt tightening. Taken together, that will produce a total of something like $6 billion in annual savings during the next fiscal year. And that includes about $1.5 billion realized from actions that we described last November. Combined with the remainder of the surplus saved during the last economic boom, that rigorous program of fiscal discipline is what permits us to preserve core city services without raising city taxes. And it also permits us to meet the increased demand for social safety net programs. Much of that demand is a residual effect of the national recession, but New Yorkers will not hesitate to meet their obligations to take care of those less fortunate. And although budget constraints unfortunately do force us to make cuts in some services, keep in mind those reductions are against levels of service that our administration raised to historic highs during better economic times. When we can afford it, we can provide more services, and we can't. It's more difficult to do, but we still are going to provide the services that the less fortunate need and that all of us need to keep us having a future, and keep the streets safe, get an ambulance or a fire truck to you when you need it, make sure that we invest in the future. Our sound management of city finances also strengthens our economy. It gives businesses the confidence to stay here, to move here, and to grow here. And today's presentation includes a review of the state of our economy, which I'll do and just demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. It is true, even as we work to create more jobs in the city and link more New Yorkers to those jobs, I think we're happy to report that private employment in our city today is at the highest it has ever been. It's really quite amazing. The country is going through a recession, but now private employment in New York City exceeds the record for private employment set back in 1969, and we expect this growth in private sector jobs to continue. As a matter of fact, from the bottom of this current recession that we've had, we've gained back something like 180% of the private sector jobs lost during the national recession. Compare that to the nation as a whole that has only regained about 40% of the jobs. So the country, 40%, New York City, 180%. A lagging national economy, however, is not good for us, and it's symptomatic of business uncertainty about the lack of decisive action on the federal government's part dealing with their deficit. We cannot make those mistakes. We have to give people clarity and confidence that we are going to face the fiscal realities and keep this a city where businesses can thrive and where people can come and live out their dreams and participate in the great American dream. Very importantly, New York City's ongoing job growth has also been spread across a wide range of industries. For years, we've talked about our 5-borough economic diversification plan. At one point, it became sort of a joke with the press because I talked about it so much. But thank God that we did that. The plan is now paying dividends. It is doing exactly what we always intended, providing a cushion against the ups and downs in our financial sector. During the latter part of 2011, the volatility in the global credit markets took a substantial toll on Wall Street profits. In fact, they went down from $27.6 billion in 2010 to $7.7 billion in 2011. In the not-too-distant past, that would have been very grim news for our entire city, and it's certainly not good news now either. But the hard work we've done to diversify our economy has done a lot to offset its effects, and it has generated growing tax revenues from TV and film production, tourism, higher education, and our rapidly growing tech sector as well. That said, the slow pace of national economic recovery and the uncertainties in the global economy have produced challenges in balancing next year's budget and presents challenges in the future that we cannot ignore. Largely because of the drop in Wall Street profits, our collection of business and personal income taxes has been weaker than we had forecast just last February, not many months ago. And to balance next year's budget, we're covering that loss of revenues along with unavoidable agency expenses with the $466 million settlement of the federal city time lawsuit. Let me underscore what that means. The city time settlement money is already baked into this budget. It is not available for other purposes, as some people had hoped it would be. Also, unless the economy and tax revenues grow faster than we now project, we can expect to face a $3 billion budget gap in 2014, which arrives less than 14 months from today. We have been able to dedicate $100 million from this year of resources towards closing that gap, and you can rest assured we won't hesitate to take the actions needed to keep the city's budget balanced. But just to put it in perspective, 2 years ago we had an extra $3.7 billion in the boom times. We used 2 of that last year. We'll using the last 1.7 of that this year. And all we're going to have to go into next year, unless tax revenues were to improve dramatically, is $100 million, which in the context of the size of our budget really is a rounding error. We are going to have some significant challenges for 2014. Before turning to the slides, let me just make 2 final points concerning state actions that are good news for our city. First, concerning our schools, the budget we're presenting today anticipates that we'll receive approximately $300 million in state and federal aid to our schools. That reflects the agreement reached in Albany in February about implementing a new, strong, and effective teacher evaluation system. That teacher evaluation system will build on the culture of accountability and results that we've created in our city schools, and that's key to the progress that our students have made. It is true, in order to receive these funds, the United Federation of Teachers has to come back to the bargaining table in a serious way and agree on the final details of this new evaluation system. We have already reached agreement on what I think are the most difficult issues, and there's no substantive reason why a final agreement should not be reached very quickly. The longer the U of T waits, however, the longer it will take our schools to get the money they need and that they deserve, and the longer that it will take to implement a system that everyone agrees is critically important to our students. And if there is no agreement by next January, we will lose that money entirely, and $300 million is a lot of money. Second, let me once again stress the importance of the pension reforms that the legislature passed and that Governor Cuomo signed as part of the state budget this year. That will save New York City taxpayers about $21 billion over the next 30 years. it will put the pension system on a firmer financial footing. However, it will be several years before city government sees any direct savings from these reforms. But their enactment strongly does reinforce the message that the government of New York City and the state has a firm grip on public finances, and that's going to continue to inspire private sector confidence, investment, and job creation. Let me give you a little more detail. I think, about all these things. Obviously, our budget has to be balanced by law, and obviously we are a part of the country, and the national recession doesn't help us, even if we have done better than the country on average and many other cities. I talked about our record in number of jobs that have been created, the effect of a decline of from 27.6 billion to 7 billion in Wall Street profits. What that does is it's a lot less taxes that Wall Street firms are paying, and it also means that the people who work in those firms have a lot less money to pay income taxes on and to filter through the system by spending, and the sales tax revenues get hurt as well. Income inequality may be bad, but we still need to have companies come here and make a lot of money, and wealthy people come here and live here. And that's where our tax base is. A very disproportionate percentage of our taxes come from a very few people, and we need those people to come here and feel that their future is our future as well. Tax revenues, I'm going to show you, are basically where we had predicted, although the second half of this year was worse than we had predicted. Overall, the year was what we had predicted, but the trend is not necessarily in our favor. And we talked about using the settlement money and the gaps that we have going forward. You'll see that a $3 billion gap in 14, $3.7 billion in 15. The gaps go forward, and we're going to have to continue to find ways to control our expenses. And I think it is clear that unless something dramatic would happen, you can expect to have more of these programs to eliminate the gap. There's just no other ways that we're going to be able to stay balanced. We fundamentally are spending this year something like $1.6 billion more than our tax revenues are going to be. We're in a business when the economy slows down and our tax revenues go down, the demand on our services go up. And we've just, one of the important things is when you have good times is to not spend the money then, but to save it for the bad times. It is the only ways you can get through the bad times. Let me just show you some of what we've talked about in graphical form. Wall Street, the stock market has done much better, but a lot of people think that it has come very far, very fast, and there's probably as many people thinking that the market's overpriced as think it's underpriced. The volatility has clearly gone down. Member profits we talked about, but you can see what happened. Big losses in 2008, that was the mortgage crisis. Big rebound in 2009. 10 was okay. 11 much lower, and we don't think this coming year is going to be very much better than the present year. So it doesn't look to us like this is going to bail us out. I talked about record number of jobs. The number of jobs is this blue line. The unemployment rate is the yellow line. The question is, if jobs are going up, why is the unemployment rate going up at the moment? This gap probably was a lot of people unemployed and were looking for work and couldn't find it. Here, you're probably getting people who have not been looking for work for a long time, thinking, well, the economy's better now, I am going to go back into the economy. And that's not atypical to see the unemployment rate go up along with job creation. Job creation number, incidentally, is also a better number in terms of the accuracy. The yellow line is done by a telephone survey, and it's not clear how accurate that is. There's always revisions, and the numbers don't tend not to add up. Whereas the number of jobs created, you have real data because people have to sign up for Social Security and companies do report. And we've done better than, as I talked about, the rest of the country. We've gone up dramatically from minus 4% to plus 2%. Here, and the country has gone up only 40%, while we've gone up 180%. That's not comforting to us. If the rest of the country isn't doing well, there are a market for a lot of our products that we create here. So that makes it harder. And also, we're part of America. We want America to grow. But at least we can take some comfort in that we're doing the right things. And maybe if the country tried to get its deficit under control, people would feel better and be willing to expand throughout the rest of the country the way they do seem to be expanding in New York. This is an indication that businesses here have confidence and they're willing to hire more people. This is an indication that nationwide there's some real questions in lots of people's minds, and they're not willing to do that. You can see where the changes were. Education, keep in mind, these are private sector jobs, so this is not a decline in employment in public education. It's a decline in employment in private education. I'll show you construction is starting to come back, but the big changes here in professional services, and then things that are healthcare clearly, and things that are dependent on tourism. This is a good example of tourism. The room nights sold and the people working in that business. So you can see that there's been a dramatic increase in people working in hotels. Why? We looked the numbers of something like 60,000 hotel rooms 10 years ago. Today it's 90,000 hotel rooms. And a lot of those are in parts of the city that did not have hotels before. Brooklyn and Queens in particular have had enormous growth in the number of hotel rooms there. Vacancy rates, this is something you want to have go down. In fact, it is doing it in offices and asking rents going up. That's good for the construction industry down the road, and it does say that companies are going and hiring people, and they need space for them. And you can see home prices still way down from the peak, and lately trending down, but still better than what happened nationwide. We didn't have the second home, spec homes and second homes that other parts of the country did have, although it's interesting, in Miami, all of this big overhang of apartments has basically disappeared. Unfortunately, it's disappeared by people getting their money out of Latin America and just buying 10 apartments at a clip so that they can protect themselves from their countries going after their assets. They still have to be rented, and the rental market is now the big problem in Miami. But there's not a lot of unsold apartments anymore there. Building permits, you can see after '08, the big collapse, it is starting to grow. A lot of places you'll see a vacant piece of land, and now all of a sudden there's construction equipment behind that fence, and that's good news for people that work in construction and good news for our future. Wages are growing, not as fast as the number of jobs. Why? We suspect it is because Wall Street and other professions, legal professions, where the salaries were typically, like compensation was typically higher, those have been going through tough times. At the same time, tourism, which is one of the answers to it, creates jobs at the other end of the spectrum. So you can argue that there are fewer high-paying jobs and more low-paying jobs, but a job is a job, and it's better than no jobs. And also, we've just got to make sure we create jobs for people and match the skill sets that they have with jobs that are available. Let me go through a few of these numbers. There's a couple of these charts that we're giving out separately just because they didn't make it into the book. But here is a good ways to look at what the city's been doing and how we have carried money from one year over to another. I talked about $3.7 billion surplus a few years ago. We used 2 of it in 2012. We're using the last 1.6 of it, 1.6 out of 1.7 in this year, and there's only $100 million to carry over into the next year. And if you look here, the difference between our revenues and our expenses is $1.6 billion. You go back to the boom years, this is where we had extra surpluses, and we, thank goodness, had them, and that's been carrying us. But this is why 2014 will really be a challenge for us. It's hard to see where a big change is going to come other than cutting expenses. You can always have an improvement in the economy, and our tax revenues can come in dramatically greater than what we'd thought, but they would have to be very dramatic. And it assumes that nothing goes wrong this year, that we get the monies we're counting on. I'll show you included in this is $1 billion for taxi medallion sales, the $300 million I talked about from state and federal government for education. This is another ways of looking at, so you can see what's really happened since last June to now. Yes, we are balanced. We always have to be balanced, and we will come up with a balanced budget for 13. But these are going forward what the deficits that we have to use and have to make up. And here is using the last of the healthcare benefits trust, $1 billion this year and $1 billion next year. You can see our pension costs. There's still a substantial increase. What else here? City time settlement, we've used that in here. The GAP program, we had $500 million for this year and $1 billion for 2013. And some of these gap closing programs go on each year, but we still have this deficit that we're going to have to approach. And here is that roll that I talked about. You can just see what we used up in 2012, or had in 2012 and used up in 13. And then here is the $125 million moved from one year to another. This gives you the details on from November to now, and I won't bore you with it. You can go through it. You can see the effects of the $500 million program to eliminate the gap in this year and the $1 billion program for next year and how it affects different agencies. This shows you all the 11 different programs to eliminate the gap. And you can see back even before 08, we had some, and it's still giving us some savings. This year's is just giving us savings in 12 and 13, but when you get to 14, that will help. And that is already in the budget deficits that I talked about back here. We are assuming that the savings we've made from these 11 programs go forward and continue. So it isn't like all of a sudden we're going to find more money. This is another ways of looking at it. You can see our expenses and our revenues, just to highlight a few numbers. It is challenging. Keep in mind, we've been challenged before. We've been challenged for the last 10 years or so, and I'm sure before that, but the 10 years that we've been together, we have balanced our budget each time. We've kept investing in the future. We've not walked away from our future the way it was done, back in the 60s and 70s, that period. And I think you see that by record employment. You see it in record population. You see it in record business formations. You see it in record tourism. Tax revenues, we think, are going to continue to grow. But here is what I was talking about before. In our June forecast of a year ago, we said $42 billion would be our taxes for 12 and $43.5 for 13. And in fact, we came in pretty much where we said. That's the good news. The bad news is you can see we had underestimated the economy was stronger in the first half of this last year and weaker in the current half. So the trend is not good, even if the overall is what we had predicted. Now, it's still with an experimental error, and it's hard to predict taxes with any great specificity. But the bottom line is they were better than the number that we picked and then worse than the number that we picked. Education, there's bad news and good news. The bad news is the state still only pays 40%. They used to pay 50%. We've used to pay 50%. Now we pay 60%. There is some federal monies coming in as well, but basically the state used to split the cost with us, and they have not done that. And have they continued to share the cost equally with the city, it would have, in 2013, our budget would be $2 billion less. You'll see some jumps in some of the education numbers, and that's because the state pulled out and we said we can't close down our school system. We still have to educate our kids, and we still want teachers paid as well as we can afford, and we've done that. I talked about the U of T having to agree with a evaluation system. If not, we won't get the $300 million. But incidentally, this budget, while we do rely on this budget, on receiving these funds, and it would be damaging to education if we didn't get them, we do expect to maintain the schools at a comparable rate in terms of we've made up for some of the attrition in the teachers from this past year and into next year. And we have ended the reduction in our per-session programs. This is a program that lets teachers teach after school and make some extra money. Pensions, we talked about this, $21 billion over 30 years. That's the good news, and this will tell you what the things are. Fundamentally, you can't retire quite as early as you could if you were a civilian or pedagogical worker. There's copay. There's an adjustment in pensions for uniform services on disabilities, and your pensions based on 5 years rather than, I think it was 3 years, final salaries. And it applies to new workers only, keep in mind. But it won't be until 2015 that we really start getting any of the savings, and you won't see anything before then. In our capital budget, it's the same basically as it was last year. Education is the largest piece of it, and then infrastructure, environmental protection this is the water tunnels and things like that, $8.8 billion and $10.67 billion for education. The good news is the schools are getting better and people want to send their kids to school. The bad news is that requires more and better facilities. And so we've got to make those kinds of investments, and we are continuing to do so. This is another way to look at the same data. Water and sewer is the environmental stuff. Keep in mind, a lot of this is planned, and then because of delays, they don't get done as quickly as the plan calls for. There are environmental issues, challenges, whatever. It takes a while to contract out. Sometimes you're waiting for federal assistance. And so these tend not to jump up in the actuality as much as they show. This would have been a lot higher in last year if you go back and look at last year's budget presentation. And this just gives you sort of a feeling for the kind of things that we are doing to make sure that we have a future. The great mistake of the 70s was we stopped investing, and people said you can't afford to invest in bad times. Investing in bad times is exactly what you have to do if you want to have a future and if you ever want to get yourself out of the bad times. And then you can take a look through here and you can see changes in the property tax rate's not changing, but the value of housing, even when it's going down, is mitigated in our tax planning by the phase-in of taxes. The 6% jump here, the Department of Finance has done a much better job, I think, of going after taxes that had not been collected. Our collections are much better than they were before, and some of that's reflected in that number. Economically sensitive taxes, we think there'll be growth, but it's not running away. Non-tax revenues, this number looks a little bit out of line, but that is the $1 billion of taxi medallion sales. If we don't get the taxi medallion sales done, that's another $1 billion hole in the budget for 2014 and would take effect, some of it, in 2013. You can go down and look and see how the budget looks for going out. A lot of it depends on what happens in the world. As I said before, our demands on us increase when our tax revenues decline, and we just have to be able to deal with that. But total controllable spending is down here. You can see that. And then same thing for the Department of Education. Non-controllable expenses, pension funds. This number looks large. It is because this is the difference between 11 and 12 was being required to fund changes in the assumptions that the actuary is making. But assuming those are done, we'll be at a period where we don't think that the pension costs are going to grow much more than that. The fringe benefits, however, will continue to grow, and so the total amount of employee costs is still going up dramatically. Medicaid, keep in mind the state is picking up increases from now on. There is that cap, so there is not a lot of increase there. FMAP is a program that has come and gone, and I think all the other numbers look pretty much the same. This shows you how we spend our money. The fire department spends $1.5 billion on salaries and wages, plus $600 billion, equal amount of money on pensions and fringe benefits, for a total of $3.2 billion. But if you take a look, this is the real number that we care about, because we have to pay lots of other things. We have to pay legal services and judgments and that sort of thing. Now, some of this, it may not be fair, but a lot of these costs in terms of legal judgments would accrue in policing. That's where you get sued. You don't tend not to get sued in the fire department or corrections department. But all of these expenses, it's not fair just to say these are the expenses to run the agencies. The whole thing is an expense to run the agency. And you'll notice that when you look at education, we get a lot of help, even at lower rates, from the state and federal government. So the city dollars are a smaller percentage, a lot less than 100% of the total amount spent, whereas in police and fire and these things, we tend not to get money from outside. So the city taxpayer pays for the vast bulk of those expenses. And you can take a look down here. We're spending $47 billion of taxpayer money. The total budget's $70 billion. And a lot of that is social service programs that just get passed through. And you can see that up in these numbers above. This is for the same thing for 13. And the same kind of things apply. And this shows you the difference one to another. It's a lot of numbers to look here, but you can look in your book and see them. And then just to take a look at 2012 and 2013, the difference between the February plan and now. The bottom line is, whether in 2012 or in 2013, there's basically not a lot of change between what we said in February we thought we were going to spend and what we think we'll spend now. Keep in mind, our estimates for 2012 should be much more accurate, because we're near the end of the year, although not totally at the end of the year yet. And we are 6 months closer, or 5 months closer, whatever it is, to 2013. But basically, the overall budget and where we're spending our money is sort of what we had thought, and the changes tend to be small in the context of the entire budget. And then you can see changes since the February plan going forward. These deficits were higher and now are lower, but they are still substantial. And then this is a similar kind of thing going out for everything. Be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, are we to assume that you bake into this the idea of keeping a freeze on all of the wages going forward for all the open collective bargaining agreements? And is there some downside risk that after you're gone, that even if there was a 0.5% increase, that the person that comes after you could have a real challenge because of the time bomb of retro pay?
Well, I don't know why there's a time bomb of retro pay.
I'm saying, you're assuming that there's no increase, correct?
I think at the moment we do not have monies to give raises. That is clear. That has nothing to do, I don't know why. I think it's clear that down the road, no administration is going to have the money going to give pay in the past. You know, I don't know any company that would give you retro pay, and it is true it has been done in the past, but given the projections for going forward, the deficits of $3.5 billion for the foreseeable future, it's not likely there's going to be extra money to do that, and I think most of the unions understand that. The good news is they're great jobs, and we are blessed with a great workforce, and there's an enormous number of people that want to come to work for the city, whether it's in teachers or police or fire. You get a chance to work with the best. There's no better education system, no better fire department, no better police department, corrections, whatever you want to do. Talk about sanitation. And while everybody would like to make more, The reality, and it's not just in New York, the reality across this country is that we have been living above our means in retrospect, although maybe we didn't think so at the time. But certainly we've been living above our means, and there's a correction taking place. And the only ways I know how to see if we can't pay our employees more is to continue to improve the economy, get people to move here. If you drive businesses away, there is not a chance of anybody getting a raise. We need to get businesses from around this country and people to move here and spend money here. And it's seductive to say, oh, let's tax everybody, but if you do that, you're not going to have a future, sir.
Mayor, council members tell us that they're very pleased that you've made the decision not to move forward on losing 2,500 teacher positions.
Way to go.
That we talked about a couple of months ago. But at the same time, they're very upset with your decision to move forward on some cuts to a lot of after-school programs, and they mentioned the figure of $60 million. Are those figures, the teacher numbers and the social service programs for after-school programs, are those figures correct, and why did you make those decisions?
Well, number one, we work with the city council between now and June 30th. So we'll see how all of that works out. But nobody should make any mistakes here. In the last half a dozen months, we have increased dramatically the amount of money that we have put into our social safety net, if you will. When we need to keep the streets safe, I can tell you, we will put the right number of cops out there. They'll be well trained, and we're going to keep this city safe. Today we're at low crime. I saw one of the major cities in the country, their crime rate, their murder rate's up 60% this year. New York City rate is at a record low. We're going to keep making the investments to keep this city safe. That's the basis of people. If people can't walk the streets, then we don't have a tax base and we can't do anything else. We also are not going to let people starve. We're not going to let them go without shelter. We're not going to have shelter systems that are inferior. You're too young to remember, but when I came into office, there were people sleeping on buses and on benches and being driven around town because we didn't have beds. It was a disgrace. Today, people, when they need services, get them, and they get them in ways that we should be proud of. Our challenge is to make sure that the services go to those who need them and not to people that don't need them because there's a limited amount of money. But we'll see how all of that plays out. Yes, sir.
The murder rate has stayed low, but there has been a spike in both subway crime and in iPhone robberies. Is there any concern for...
Yeah, but keep in mind, we put 5.5 million people a day on the subway. There is virtually, it's not zero, but there's virtually no crime. I don't know any other place. If the worst problem we have is iPhone stealing, and Ray, you better get on this iPhone right away, this is serious. There's always going to be some of that, unfortunately. But I think generally most crime you can measure it, at least the trends, by auto theft. We've always thought, because people call it an insurance company, and murder, because it's very hard to hide a body. So those numbers tend to be very good, and the other things tend to follow it. And we do live in a world where people carry around and treat cavalierly pieces of technology that are useful to somebody if they steal them and easy to steal. And that's a challenge. You're always going to have that. Yes, miss, I'm sorry.
How many new teachers are you hiring, and are all of those teachers going to go to the turnaround schools that are...
No, they're spread across the school system, and we are going to replace whatever attrition comes, and even some of the attrition of last year's. About 2,500 teachers, roughly 2,500.
Do you see that having any impact on class sizes?
If the good news would be, good news. It is gratifying that more and more people want to send their kids to school, so that uses up some of that. And also remember, there are a lot of special ed kids. Special ed kids have very small class sizes. Some get a teacher full-time, sometimes more than one teacher. And so the numbers are a little bit misleading. If you were to take the number of teachers divided into the number of students, you say class size is 13 or some number like that. In fact, it's 23 roughly, and the difference is the special ed that distorts the numbers dramatically. Yes, sir?
Your proposal to shutter 20 fire companies, the fire commissioner said that it will increase response times and will affect every community citywide. Some of the council members...
Fire commissioner is always going to say that. We'll see how the budget comes out between now and June 30th. But let me point out, we have the lowest number of deaths by fire ever in the history of the city since we started keeping numbers 1916. Fastest response time ever, lowest number of deaths. The city was half the size then. We know how to keep this city safe, and we're going to continue to do so. Our job is not to spend as much money as we can. Our job is not to hire as many people as we can. Our job is to provide the services that the public deserves and to do it as economically as possible. And I think we've shown after 10 years we know how to do that, and you can rest assured we'll continue to do it, sir.
Yeah, to your point, Councilman Budget Chair Recchia said something that you had said earlier back, that he's concerned that a lot of these firehouse assignments go back to the time of the 19th century when the equipment was drawn by horses. He suggested maybe taking a look at the whole way we've assigned these firehouses, because maybe population has increased in some areas where...
I think there is no question that if you were to today sit down with a map and cite all our firehouses, it would be very different. Having said all of that, Dominic Recchia probably wouldn't like it if we moved some firehouses out of his district. It is a political thing. I don't think there's any question about that. But we do move firehouses and move equipment, and in the end, the commissioner has to deal with the fact that we can't afford to rip down firehouses and build them elsewhere and that sort of thing. Yeah, it would be better, as the population changes, you should probably every 10 years move your firehouses. You're not going to do that. But he has found ways to keep bringing deaths down and keep improving the response time. And, you know, that's what we're going to keep doing. Yes, Miss?
The projections here are much worse than some that were issued even a month ago. Is it possible that the city's being overcautious?
No. The numbers are better than they were. If you go back and look, let me try to find that for you. Hang on. Which one? I'm sorry?
The IBO projections, just to be clear, that's what I was referring to.
I don't know what the IBO does. You'll have to ask them. I mean, you know, everybody's got a different... I'm not knocking them. Projecting the future is difficult. If I could tell you the future, you know, things would be very different. We can't tell you the future. You try to make assumptions, and some you're going to be right on, and some you're going to be wrong on. And if you're in the ballpark, that's probably pretty good. The one I wanted to show you here was the change in deficit from projections from one year to another. Hang on. Here, if you go back in February, we talked about deficits of this magnitude, and here the deficits are somewhat less. Yes, Miss?
The $1 billion worth of money for taxis.
Yep.
How confident are you that you'll be able to sell those medallions, considering there are now 2 lawsuits, both one on the taxi tomorrow and the 5-borough plan? And should you not be able to get $1 billion?
If we don't get the $1 billion, we're going to have to cut services in this city dramatically. There's no other alternative. Our controller said that I read someplace that he wanted to stop us. Hopefully that won't be the case. We think we will win the lawsuits that are against us. And Michael Cardozo just better win, wherever he is. That's, you know, you're depending on, the Albany legislature did what we asked them to do, and now we have to go and fight those battles. And if you take a look, the trends in taxes revenues are down. The last half of the year we showed you that, and we're assuming that we get the $1 billion in medallion sales. We're pretty confident there's demand out there, so that's not going to, we don't think, be the problem. The question is does a lawsuit hold you up? And if a judge holds you up, then we start laying off people. You know, our business is hiring people to provide services. If you have less money, you have fewer people. Yes, sir.
Chart 36, why in a period where interest rates are going down is debt service payments going up?
Part of that is, Mark, more debt. You know, I mean, interest rates are lower, but keep in mind the way you account for this is if you were to refinance, you take all the savings up front. You don't take the savings out over a period. That's just the way the accounting works, and it's always worked that way. But it's more debt.
It's more to refinance up front.
No, that's not true.
Why can't the city refinance a lot of the debt?
We do it as much as we can. Yeah, that's Mark's job. That's what he spends his time on. But you have a lot of debt out there that you just can't call. People that own that debt want to continue to get their payments. Mark, you want to add anything?
The refinancing is a continuous process in a low interest rate environment, and if we can continue to do it, it's possible that increase will actually come down over time. But that's where we stand right now.
But the bottom line is we are investing in the future, and it's appropriate to commit to paying over a long period of time if what you buy is going to give you service over a long period of time. And typically, if we sell 30-year bonds and build the firehouse lasts more than 30 years. So, you know, we even do better than what the numbers would say. The sin would be borrowing and then using it to balance the budget, because then you have nothing left. Yes, sir.
Do you think there'll ever come a day when there won't be this structural deficit imbalance? I mean, you told us that there's a record number of people employed, yet there are these multi-billion-dollar deficits going on.
Well, because you plan on doing everything that you'd like to do, and then the reality brings you back, and you do only part of what you would like to do. So the fact that we have them doesn't mean that anybody's acting irresponsibly. And in fact, even if we wanted to act irresponsibly, the law requires you to balance the budget. So we will not spend $3 billion more next year than we bring in. Why? Because we don't have any role coming into it. And the bottom line is the law doesn't let you do it. So, I mean, it's not quite the way you phrase it of your being, whatever the word opposite of frugal is, extravagant or whatever. It is more a statement of these are the things you would like to do. And then you wait and see what your revenues are, and you cut back to match the two. You could always raise taxes, but I think that is self-defeating, and you would have a tough time getting anybody to, in this day and age, to want to raise taxes. Anybody? Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, could you clarify, are there 20 fire companies on the chopping block here or not?
We funded them, not baselined, and we'll take a look and see. The issue is not that. The issue is, do we believe that we can keep this city safe? Do we believe that we can get a fire truck or an engine to you as fast as we've done before, and maybe even faster, and make sure that that piece of equipment is in good shape, and that the men and women that man it know what they're doing, and they can save your life and bring deaths down? That's the job. That's what we want to focus on, the service provided. That's what our job is. And how we do it is a lot less material, I think. We've shown we know how to do it. You can always do it. Sometimes more equipment doesn't always, or more people doesn't always get you a better service. We have 280,000 employees down from 310,000, and city services are better than they've ever been. It'd be pretty hard to find any city service that isn't better than it's been. I'm sure there's a couple. But fundamentally, things are better, and we're employing fewer people. That's what we're supposed to do. Yes, Miss.
Mr. Mayor, just to get you to clarify, are you concerned that the child care and after-school cuts in this budget will make it harder for working people to stay?
Yes, I'm concerned. Yes, do you have any other questions?
Do you expect a deal? It seemed like you were hinting that maybe the council will restore it, or there'll be some kind of...
You have to wait and see what we do. I told you, we will come to an agreement collaboratively with the City Council on or before June 30th. I expect an on-time budget that will, to the extent that we can afford it, satisfy the needs of the city. We cannot do everything for everybody and we can't do everything we want in the size and frequency and whatever the other words are that you would like. But this is the objective is to try to balance and make choices, and we will do that and do it responsibly, and I think we've shown we've done that for 10 years. Yes, Miss?
Regarding the after-school program, do you think it's short-sighted to cut city funds on things that's not directly benefiting the city's economy?
I'm not sure why you think that after-school programs do benefit the city's economy. They help working families go to work. They help the kids to become productive members of society. I think that's a mischaracterization of after-school programs. They are incredibly valuable, and we'll do as much as we possibly can. Yes, sir.
I realize there's a 2-month negotiation period here, but several council members and advocates are saying that the priorities that you are proposing today as it relates to social services are unfair. One council member said...
I don't much care what he said, if you really want to know. I think you're wasting everybody's time. Why would I care? He has a right to say, I'll defend his First Amendment right to say what he wants. He can go out on the steps of City Hall and say it to you all the time. And you'll probably even write it. I don't know why you'd bother to, but you want to, go ahead.
I'm curious as to what your response is.
You're always curious. I don't have a response to it. Why? I don't have to have a response to everything. People have a right to say what they want and express their views. There's nothing wrong with that. They weren't elected to run the city. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with them having those views. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you referred to, just quickly, about the issue of the federal government's inability to project confidence and resolve its deficit of debt issues and that impact on the global marketplace. And I was just wondering if we do go ahead with the deal the president had to close with the debt ceiling limit with the Republicans, we're looking at $1.3 trillion in cuts in discretionary spending that will have direct impact on cities and states. Wouldn't that have an impact on New York City?
Sure. Any other questions?
Well, what area would you anticipate? 2013 is not that far away.
I don't have any idea. I don't know how anybody can predict what the federal government's going to do other than kick the can down the road. You could bet a lot of money on that, wouldn't you? I mean, who knows what they're going to do? I think it is clear that we have a deficit problem that is going to hurt this country dramatically, and unless we do something about it, it is a cloud on the horizon. Doesn't mean America is going to go to zero. But I think you take a look at Europe and other places, and it shows you when you live above your means. It's different than the city. Mr. Seifman's question, the deficits that we predict are aspirational deficits. In the end, we balance our budget. The federal government does not. The federal government prints money. The European countries did that. And eventually it catches up with you. This year, next year, nobody really knows when it's going to happen. The federal government has not been able to come together either side of the aisle, either end of Pennsylvania Avenue, and address the problem that we are living way above our means and can't keep doing it.
So for you, that's a central issue in this election, this national...
How did we get to... we're talking about what impact on New York City.
Because you're talking about the...
I think it should be a central issue for everybody. Yes.
Disappointing results in what has been the engine for this city for a long time, the financial sector. And you said through it as an aside, the federal government's inability to reach consensus on this was part of that. I was just trying to get some more clarification.
Did I say that?
Well, you mentioned it.
I think that the federal government's doing everything it can to destroy the engine that we need to take us out of it. But I don't remember saying it in that context. The federal government's got other problems, too. They are trying to drive industry overseas with our immigration policy and hurt industries here. They're trying to create chaos on the streets. That's going to hurt the economy, and it's certainly inhumane with more guns than people. Stop me when you get bored. I mean, but, you know, the federal problems are the federal problems. We're here to talk about New York City's problems. And I think to sum it up, the message is no matter what a city councilman thinks, and he or she has a right to their views, we will come up with an on-time budget working with the city council the same ways we've done for the last 10 years. It will be a responsible budget. It will not have new taxes in it. And the challenges that we have going forward are trying to find ways to pay for things that we would like to have, and the like to have is what's shown in those deficits. It's $3 odd billion more than what we think our revenues projecting into the future. And the accuracy of a projection of tax revenues for 2016 or 2015, even 2014, is very suspect. But we have acted in a responsible ways, and you see that in record employment, record population, record tourism, record business formations, and record life expectancy, record low crime, all of those things, and dramatically improving schools. That's what we've done, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And is it a challenge? Yes, it's always a challenge. Will it be a challenge for the next administration? No more and no less than the challenge that we had when we came into office. It's always going to be a challenge. People are always going to want more, want to pay less. That's just the real world. And it's government's job to find ways to balance, do what's needed, and not any more than that. Thank you very much.
You're going to go